Good afternoon. Today is Friday, September 11th, 2020. I am meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update, one day past the climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. 2 named storms, 4 tropical waves, 2 investigative areas, 95L and 96L out in the Atlantic, and Paulette and Rene. All right, here's a broad look of what's going on. You see a lot of activity. 2 waves about to be in the Gulf, one just outside of the Gulf. 2 named storms in the Atlantic and 2 waves emerging off the coast of Africa. Going to try something a little bit different today. We're going to do some tropical trivia. Today's trivia question is, Hurricane John was the longest lasting tropical cyclone on record. It was both a hurricane and a typhoon, traveled over 7,100 miles. How many days did it last? If you know the answer, put it in the stream. You can wait till the end of this video and I'll reveal the answer for you and talk a little bit more about Hurricane John. Out there in the Atlantic Basin now, lots of activity. Those 2 named storms, we'll start with those first. Tropical Storm Paulette, which over the last several days has been battling some pretty intense wind shear, overall has remained still a tropical storm, hasn't weakened it very much. We're back up to 65-mile-an-hour winds, gusts up to hurricane force, and it has picked up its forward speed a little bit, now moving to the northwest at around 10 miles per hour. The imagery we're looking at right here is the infrared. Tells us the temperature of the cloud tops. The colder the cloud tops, the stronger, more intense the thunderstorm activity associated with the storm is. You can see here some shades of white and black indicating the strong storms, but still some wind shear is evident, although on visible satellite imagery, it's not all that pronounced as it was the last couple of days. So wind shear lessening just a little bit, meaning we're likely going to be in for some intensification here in the next 12 to 24 hours. And that's exactly what the National Hurricane Center is calling for. Up to a Category 1 hurricane by tomorrow night on Saturday, with winds sustained up to 75 miles an hour. And as it continues to strengthen, getting to a higher end Category 1 storm by Sunday evening at 8 p.m. with winds of 90 miles per hour. Here is Bermuda in the crosshairs of Paulette. Going farther out in time, strengthens more. 100-mile-per-hour winds up to a Category 2 hurricane here by Monday morning at 8 a.m., potentially making landfall or passing very, very close to the island of Bermuda before moving north and strengthening even a little bit more to sustain winds of 105 miles per hour. So that got me thinking, what's Bermuda's hurricane history look like as we look back since 1851? Well, impacts on the island are frequent. It's in Hurricane Alley. Numerous storms pass close, really close to the island pretty often. 59 storms overall in that time frame, passing within 50 miles of Hamilton, Bermuda, the capital of Bermuda. Landfalls, though, are rare. Only 9 recorded landfalls or partial landfalls. A landfalling storm means the center of the eye of a storm, or the center of a storm, passes directly over the island. Partial landfalls, part of the eye moves over the island. It's only happened 9 times. But back in 2014, a very interesting thing happened. Faye and Gonzalo both making landfall on Bermuda. That's the only time that's ever happened. Think about how small Bermuda is and think about how big the Atlantic is. It's like hitting the bullseye on a dartboard twice in one season. Very, very rare there. So some interesting hurricane history there with the island. There's a look at the 59 storms that have come within 50 miles of Hamilton, Bermuda since 1851. Very, very active, obviously, in that area. The good news with Bermuda, though, a lot of their home constructions is mainly out of stone, so they weather these storms very, very well when they get hit so frequently. And here's how the models are seeing things. We're looking at the GFS ensemble, 21 members, so it's the GFS model, just run 21 separate times with 21 members, tweaking the initialization just a little bit. Much more consistency now with all of the members pretty much showing the same sort of track here. A little bit more divergence the farther out in time you get, but that is to be expected. All the other hurricane models pretty much in line with that too. The majority of them following the same track as what we're seeing with the GFS ensemble. All right, right behind Paulette is Rene. I mean, here it is on satellite imagery. Very sorry excuse for a tropical storm, and it's barely that. Winds are at 40 miles per hour. You need 39 miles per hour to be considered a tropical storm, and it really does not present very well on satellite imagery. However, on visible, you can sort of see more of a structure here. It's still battling wind shear coming in out of the east. You can see that exposed center with all of its convection, or really lack of convection, displaced on off towards the west of the center of that system there. And until the wind shear relaxes, which is Going to do a little bit in the next couple of days. It'll likely maintain that strength, if not strengthen just a little bit more in due time. Here's the forecast track on this. Thankfully, this is not going to be impacting any land masses. Although it's going to be what we call a fish storm staying out in the middle of the Atlantic, its overall position in the Atlantic will eventually influence what's to come behind it. And we're talking about those two tropical waves off the coast of Africa. We'll talk about it a little bit more in just a minute. But let's get a little bit closer to home now with two tropical waves that are headed into the Gulf of Mexico, one currently there, one over the Bahamas right now, expected to track off towards the west into the Gulf of Mexico in the short term. And some big changes with this. It has not only been coined Invest 96L by the National Hurricane Center, but at their 2 o'clock update, they're saying this is looking much more organized. Pressures have fallen, so they have really upped the chances of this wave becoming Sally and not the one off the coast of Africa. If this is Sally and the one develops off Africa, that one would be Teddy. And an 80% chance of that happening, 70% within the next 2 days. In fact, that could even happen, become a tropical depression or tropical storm later today into tonight as it passes over South Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. Here's how it looks on the satellite imagery. Not all that organized as it looks on this imagery now. Certainly some plumes of thunderstorm activity, but you can't really see a defined center. However, when we switch things up on the visible satellite, you can sort of see some broad rotation there. It can be debated whether there is a closed off low there or not, but likely going to continue getting organized as it moves by, possibly through Miami, and then enters the Gulf of Mexico here in the next 24 hours or so. How do the models see things? We'll go back over to the GFS ensemble with the 21 members. Not all members, though, even thinking that this gets to be a closed low, which is why we only have a few of the members going all the way out into the Gulf of Mexico. But those that do could see that intensifying and pretty rapidly here with the very warm waters and the heat content in that part of the ocean very, very high. So the areas to watch as we get into early next week for potential impacts from what could be Sally or a tropical depression, some sort of tropical cyclone, will be pretty much along the entire Gulf Coast here. Models kind of vary dependent on where they bring it on shore. You can see the sea surface temperatures here are extremely warm. Where it is currently located, mid to upper 80s, and where it's moving, even just a little bit warmer, 88 degrees just off the southwest coast of Florida. And the heat content is there too. We talked about this in numerous other videos. It's not just the skin of the ocean that's really warm. That heat extends down to a depth, and when storms mix up the ocean, something called upwelling, they continuously mix up warm water, so the fuel source is pretty much unlimited. All right, let's talk about the other waves now coming in off the coast of Africa. In fact, they just recently emerged. And this is one wave that will likely split into two separate entities. One that tracks off to the north has slightly lower chances of development, around 40%. The one that will be tracking a little bit farther to the south has been coined 95L, 70% chance of that developing, but 90% within the next 5 days. Depending on if 95 or 96 develop first, it's either Sally or Teddy. Those are the two next names on the list there. Here's a look at it on satellite imagery. Very broad overall circulation. Kind of has been the trend as we've seen these waves come off the coast. They take a little time to organize as they push off towards the west. Here's how the long-range models see things, okay? We'll start things off with the European model. We'll go right on through the weekend, start things off here at Sunday at 8 in the morning. You can see this low is closed off, a secondary feature off behind it, kind of working its way off to the northwest a little bit more. Farther out in time, we see it slowly starting to organize further and strengthen by the time we get to Monday evening at 9:30 and pushing right through midweek. Wednesday morning at 9:30, we're approaching the Leeward Islands here, and it's going to be moving its way off towards the west a little bit farther, intensifying maybe just a little bit more. And as it moves to the northwest, this is a change from yesterday's models that were showing it passing into the Caribbean. This time around, it looks to be trending its way more to the north and west, so potentially sparing the Leeward Windward Islands and over into parts of Hispaniola and Puerto Rico as well, and then drifting its way off to the north-northwest, intensifying as it does so with the water temperature still in this part of the ocean extremely warm, and we could see ourselves a pretty potent hurricane in the Atlantic by not this weekend, but next weekend and even the week after that. This is going to be a long duration event. We're going to have to watch carefully there. And certainly this could change back to what was trending towards yesterday, which was farther off to the south and southwest. How does the American model, the GFS, see things? Very similarly. There's a lot of agreement between these two long-range models on something that's very far out in the future, which is kind of unusual here. Same development moving off towards the west and a low latitude and then gradually drifting its way off to the west-northwest. Remember how I said Rene wasn't affecting anybody, but its position in the ocean will actually influence the steering of these two storms. That's exactly right. With that storm off towards the north, it'll start to pull its way off to the north as it carves out a weakness in the overall ridge, and that's what will be driving that to the north there. Similar placement from what we just saw with the European model by the time we get towards September 21st. So after next weekend and that early part of that week. The models on it, the GFS ensemble, again, kind of two separate camps here. One taking it farther to the west for a longer duration of time. Some steering it off to the north much, much sooner. Handful of members there, the majority, though, off towards the west. All right, the answer to that tropical trivia question, Hurricane John was around for 31 days, an entire calendar month. That thing moved over 7,100 miles. It actually crossed the international date line, so that made it a hurricane to a typhoon, and then passed back over it, so it was a typhoon to a hurricane before it fell apart. 31 days. Imagine tracking that long. 1994 was the year that was around. All right, if you have a question on the tropics, don't be afraid to ask. You can find me on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. I hope you all have a great weekend.